The presidency says Cyril Ramaphosa will take his time in finding a replacement for Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool. Rasool is expected back in South Africa this weekend after Trump's administration expelled him from his position and the country. Briefing on the president's program, spokesperson Vincent Magwenya reiterated government's robust and intensified engagements with Washington amid strained relations. Let's talk about this with senior researcher at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, Jeenah, who joins us now. Naeem, good morning to you, and thank you for your time. And Professor Stephen Friedman joins us as well. Thank you very much for yours as well, Stephen. Appreciate both of you also holding on. I know the Deputy President changed his schedule, so we had to move things around just a little bit. But really just appreciate both of you being on this. And I wanted to really just say 5 days in or 6 days in, public debate, conflicting opinions on whether Rasool's sentiments on the U.S. were ill-timed or not. There were reminders of comparatively far worse behavior from U.S. ambassadors to South Africa without this type of censure. So I'd really like to start with the both of you and your assessment of the way the South African government has now handled the matter hitherto. And Prof. Friedman, I'd love for you to kick us off.
Well, I think that the South African government, quite frankly, is being, far too apologetic, and the South African government at the moment seems to be seized with the fantasy, or at least that's what it's saying in public, that somehow if we say something or do something, then the Trump administration is somehow going to like us. And I think South Africans have to accept that the Trump administration is not going to like us. This is an administration which fires the head of the army because he's a black person. There's nothing in a majority-ruled South Africa that they like. Mr. Trump is surrounded by ex-South Africans who hate majority rule and who egg him on the whole time. So I think that we need to be a bit more... I'm not saying they should insult the US. I'm simply saying that these constant things that, the presidential spokesperson yesterday was saying, well, people mustn't welcome Mr. Rasool back in a way which offends the Americans. This is really living in a fantasy world, and is really not looking after the interests of this country. What we should be doing at this stage is looking at the kind of alliances and the kind of partnerships that we can build. Given that there's a deeply prejudiced administration in the United States, which hates us because of what we are. Obviously, that's not desirable, but there's nothing we can do about it. And I think that, we really need to spend far more time working out how to build relationships around the world so that the damage that has been done is minimized, rather than this constant attempt to try to be nice to people who really hate us.
Wow, what an opening gambit. Naeem, your thoughts?
Well, I can't top that. No, I agree with Stephen. I think that this attempt to appease the unappeasable is a problem. The Trump administration, as far as South Africa is concerned, is going to be offended for the next 4 years, and is going to be offensive for the next 4 years. We live with that. I think the decision to postpone the naming of a replacement for Ebrahim Rasool is a good thing, at least until things settle in Washington, D.C., and we get a better sense of who's who in that zoo before we appoint anyone. But in the meanwhile, the important thing is not to bend over so far backwards that we break our backs to appease them, but rather to create other relationships that are more useful and more sustainable in the long term. Among those, for example, the Europeans who now, and no illusion that even the Europeans won't drop us when they want to. All states operate according to their own interests. But the Europeans are now looking for allies, in a sense, against the US. They also feel under pressure, supporting South Africa on the G20 issue and other issues. That's one area. The other area that's not been dealt with enough, we have been, but not enough, is building strong alliances across the global South. And then in the United States itself, particularly, our concern with the United States is not so much their politics, but it's the economics of it.
I think that Naeem's signal has frozen. But what the both of you seem to concur on, Stephen, is this idea that South Africa needs to find new friends. You know, in the way that we've predicated or set up this discussion recently, we talk about...
Those businesses will continue working with us.
Sorry, Naeem, we completely lost you there for a moment. So since we've got you back, maybe just the last part of what you were saying, just repeat.
So I said that we must build our relations with Europe, with the global south, and in the United States with the businesses with whom we have dealings. Even if we don't have a good relationship with the government, businesses that have interests here, who we export to, etc.
Again, the both of you converge on similar issues, that essentially South Africa should be finding new friends. In predicating this discussion, we often talk about the fact that the US is our second largest trading partner. It is a strategically important relationship, and we should be very careful around how we manage that. So how do we balance these two things, or these two priorities, Prof. Friedman?
Well, you see, the issue is really that, you know, people keep on saying how important this relationship is. Yes, of course it's important. I'm not minimizing that. I mean, the kind of human damage which has been done by withdrawing money for people living with HIV and AIDS is appalling. And, you know, this is not a desirable situation. But my point is that, you know, if there's nothing you can do about a situation, then you have to find ways of adapting to that situation, rather than this futile attempt to change what is going on. I mean, I keep on reminding people, you know, this is a government which is trying to make war on Canada. They're threatening to invade Denmark. There is not a democratic country in the world which they're not picking a fight with, because they hate democracy. And therefore, you know, there are certain realities here. And I mean, I've had many conversations with people on this issue, and inevitably people say, oh, but it's a very important economy, etc. You know, and I keep on saying, you know, if we have too much rain, you're not going to make the rain going away by going outside without an umbrella. We need an umbrella, and the umbrella will protect us, hopefully, as much as possible from the fact that an important partner is not available. But also, I think where I would also agree with Naeem, you know, one has always got to, and in fact, I think that's what Ebrahim Rasool was saying in his Mr. talk. You always have to distinguish between the government of the country and the people of the country. The fact that the government of the United States hates us doesn't mean that the people of the United States hates us. So any opportunity we have to strengthen links with the people of America, whether these are business people or intellectuals or journalists, or whatever the case may be, that must obviously be something we continue to work for, because hopefully, you know, America will not always be governed by a country which hates us.
Yeah.
But I'm simply saying that, you know, realism dictates that our energy needs to go into building those partnerships, strengthening those we already had. You know, just to add one thing, you know, Naeem talks about the global south. That's important. European Union is important. I mean, Japan and Korea, for example, are long-time US allies who are also being held out to dry to a certain extent. So I think that there are conversations we could be having with them which would be productive to both sides.
And I think what the both of you are urging in this conversation, in fact, in your commentary after this webinar that's now, you know, suddenly blown up, is around sobriety. It's to have almost this topographical picture, you know, kind of aperture out from, or, you know, sort of zoom out from just sticking on this issue around Rasool, what he said. And Naeem, I'd like to come to you just for a quick comment on that. You were in that webinar that sparked what, you know, the situation that we're seeing now. And to see South Africa in a reframed, reimagined way. And the second piece of that, to your point, Stephen, is that South Africa's also got to do work, a lot more work in building alternative relationships and building credible other relationships with other people that could partner with us potentially better. And I think that that's a really important thing to take out. But Naeem, maybe then just comment on where we are, you know, several days after, with all the things that have happened, how in some places it has, again, reinforced some polarity. And your thoughts, having been in that webinar that kind of led to where we are today, of what your perspective is on how people have reacted to this and this diplomatic move now.
Let me pick up on one thing that came up in the webinar by a number of the participants, and that is the call for South Africa to be more self-sustainable. Now, in the globalized world that we live in, that's a difficult ask. But nevertheless, if we look at PEPFAR funding, for example, makes up 17% only of our total HIV/AIDS funding. Now, I know, 12,000 health workers stopped receiving income because PEPFAR stopped. But in 2002, PEPFAR funding made up 100% of our HIV/AIDS program in South Africa. Now it makes up only 17%. There is a way in which we can become self-sustaining in various different things. The AGOA thing, which is a big thing that everyone keeps talking about as a kind of scare tactic, about how important the US is, etc. AGOA, according to a study done by a US think tank 2 years ago, if we were deprived of AGOA benefits, as they say, South Africa's GDP will suffer about 0.06%. It's not that huge. Our trade with the United States will still continue. There will be certain things that will be affected, but also that American businesses are already looking at how, if that happened, they might be able to circumvent it. So I think that the Ebrahim Rasool's call for us not to panic, I think it's a double thing. Don't panic, but work out ways in which this second largest trading partner, we can mitigate any losses that might be incurred as a result. And there's enough kind of work being done in South Africa to say that we can, without having to go overboard trying to appease really a bunch of racists who now, Stephen, they also, from the Arlington Cemetery, have removed the names of all, these are military veterans and supposed heroes of the US. All black people, all people who are not white, and all women's names have been removed from their website. I mean, this is how ridiculous it is. Do we want to really appease this kind of a person? We keep saying our foreign policy is based on our constitution, human rights, justice, and all of that. This is the kind of administration that we should build alliances globally against.
Yeah, it's who's opining and what value do you place on that opinion? Stephen, to you, the former U.S. ambassador to South Africa, this is Patrick Gaspard, who's now a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and the Center for the American Progress Action Fund, criticized the U.S., saying it should be noted that Marco Rubio himself said far worse things about Donald Trump in the past than anything said by Ambassador Rasool. Let's be real about what these people are up to with their obsessive targeting of South Africa and their performance of grievance. How do you understand that? And again, relocating everything that's happening between Washington and Pretoria in a different frame of understanding.
Well, Patrick Gaspard is a former ambassador to here who's essentially watching everything he tried to build in the US-South Africa relationship being destroyed by the United States government. And, as one would expect, he's dismayed and he's angry because what he's essentially saying is the American government has picked a fight here. And I think that's the point that needs to be driven home. I've spoken to colleagues in Washington who tell me, and I think they're right, that there's not a single American administration before this one who would have reacted to Ebrahim Rasool's remarks in the way that this one did. So, the problem is not us. The problem is them. And Patrick Gaspard is pointing that out. But there's one sense in which the problem is us. And I think one has to talk, because that's what my contribution to this has been about. And that is the local debate in this country. And what I have in mind here, yes, there are people in this country like AfriForum and Solidarity who don't like majority rule and who see Trump as an ally, etc. I'm not one of those people who think there's any mileage in taking action against people. This is a constitutional democracy. But what I am concerned about is what, our mainstream respectable debate is so deferential to the United States, even when it's run by the kind of people who Naim is describing, that it gives Trump an opportunity, because they're always, the Rasool incident is a particular example. I mean, media have continually talked about gaps and debacle had presented this kind of image of Rasool as some kind of incompetent, who stirred up a hornet's nest because he doesn't know what he's doing. I mean, none of that stuff is true. And all of it is there because a lot of people in this country find it very difficult to accept the fact that the United States that we've been dealing with for the last 80 years isn't there anymore. Generally, I think we lose out because we're too differential to large, rich countries. I mean, I've written a book on COVID-19 arguing that actually we could have saved a lot more lives if we hadn't tried to be exactly like the West. But I think this is a reminder to us, it's been quite dismaying in a sense, the extent to which a lot of mainstream people who don't consider themselves prejudiced have just sort of dumped on Rasool and given a blank check to the US government.